minutes, almost 6 minutes of stoppage time. Maswanganyi, little chipped, little Panenka, and the winner, it would seem.
I think he was caught there with the space and time, then Mfokeng with the nice control just in front of him.
Ayeye bafethu, ayeye mapagania. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the BigDaddy Football Corner. At exactly 1935, bafethu, on Twitter, Orlando Pirates officially confirmed, what has been circulating for some time, in the media. Tito Maswanganyi has completed a move to Khaldiya Sports Club, in Bahrain Premier League. This is what the statement said, and in this statement, the club explained, that although Maswanganyi remained part of the technical team's plans, which is something that Coach Wadu have been saying all along, that he's going to be a very key player for Orlando Pirates this season, but the statement from Pirates says the player, and his representative expressed a clear desire to pursue a new opportunity abroad, and then although that says already that, the player and his representative wanted this move. But here, guys, I'm here to give you a perspective. I'm here to give you, my own, my own assessment of the situation, where I feel Tito Maswanganyi, why I feel, that his Orlando Pirates exit, absolutely makes sense. For me, this is a logical outcome, from both, the player and the club, and again, Tito Maswanganyi has been one of the most influential, attacking players, over the past season, for Orlando Pirates. If you go back and you look at his numbers, at his data, again, Bafethu, I've always been, critical, by using assist as a standalone evaluation metrics, because for me, an assist, is partly and is partly dependent on what the receiving player does with the final action, and for me, a more interesting, scouting metrics for me is the big chances created, because for me it is better and it captures the quality of chance creation itself, rather than simply whether the subsequent action, was converted or not, again, but Maswanganyi's goal contribution and numbers demonstrate, Bafethu, I'm just gonna look at the past 3 seasons. It demonstrates his influence, and the fact that he was not just an aesthetic kind of a player or based on reputation, but his output was tangible, Bafethu, Tito Maswanganyi's underlining numbers, reinforce how important he was, at Orlando Pirates. Let's go back. Maybe like 3 seasons back, 2023, 2024 season, he recorded 10 goals, 12 assists, and he played 3,396 minutes, in that particular season. And if you go again, you look at, his GA per 90 minutes, it was 0.58, per 90 minutes. For me, I like this statistic, or this data metrics, because it tells you his direct contribution, per minutes played, and that's what I like about looking at the minutes rather than looking at the number of matches that he particularly played. And again, in terms of his assists, and his goals, this was probably his best season, according to everyone. But I'm here to shock you that Tito Maswanganyi's best season wasn't that season. But let's go there. 2024, 2025, he contributed 7 goals and 4 assists. And he played again 3,285 minutes, but his GA per 90 minutes, it dropped to 0.30 in this particular instance. And probably that's the season where everybody's saying, no, Tito is not contributing, what he should. Then, for me, his best season was last season. He contributed, last season, about 10 goals and actually 4 assists. And he only played 1,758 minutes. And his GA, per 90 minutes was 0.72. That is incredible for a player that played less minutes but his contribution, was immensely. And the reason why I'm sharing these numbers is for you to understand his significant, contribution, even regarding, even with his reduced or limited time, especially in these finals in last season, he contributed immensely, and that was his best season. And again, Bafethu, Tito for me was more than his numbers. He had something that cannot be quantified. He had a connection, Bafethu, with the supporters. He was a genuine favorite. His personality, his swagger, his competitive character, resonated with the Orlando Pirates fan base. He became one of the few players, at Orlando Pirates that will have a chant that is specifically dedicated to him inside the stadium. There was a clear contrast, between, for me, the person on the pitch and the person outside the pitch in terms of Tito. Away from football, people that are close to him, they describe him as a very humble, a very reserved individual, but once the whistle goes on, he played with so much personality, aggression, arrogance, self-belief. He for me, I genuinely believe that he belongs among the big players, in terms of personality, And again, I went on a Twitter, and I wrote that I was particularly very excited, about the possibility of seeing him playing alongside, Umtetele Mtiane and Utapelo Makobodi, because they will suit him fine. I mean, Umtiane, how he plays those line breaking passes, Pagate Scopin, and Fagi Pola. And for me, this is something that I even said on Twitter that it was a combination that I was yearning for, because of the profiles of these three players, which appeared very complementary, and for me it was going to be a fascinating, technical and functional balance between those two teams. And again, Bafethu, for me, the fundamental issue for me was tactical compatibility. Because for me, Maswanganyi under coach Jose Rivero, because of the positional framework, Jose gave him considerable freedom. His positional fluidity was not necessarily treated as ill-discipline. Instead, it was incorporated into the team attacking structure. He could roam around the pitch. He could drop, towards where the ball is. He could occupy different pockets. He will influence possession frequently. He was effectively given freedom, and which is associated with high involvement, of an attacking player, and again, my friends, Tito Maswanganyi is the type of a player, that generates his energy from being on the ball, and every time he's on the ball is where he generates his energy. And if he takes a lot of minutes without being on the ball, he becomes a little bit cold. And you could see even his body language, Usman, he's not enjoying the game when he's not on the ball. So the arrival of Coach Abdesalam Wadu, last season, represented a philosophical shift, because model Coach Wadu is more collective, it's more structured oriented, and again, the team's mechanism, they take, precedence over individual freedom. Again, the question was no longer about how do we maximize Tito, but rather how does Tito maximize the collective, of the team. And for me, there was a significant distinction, from Jose's era and Coach Abdesalam's era. If you look at it, Maswanganyi went from the last season, Jose playing 3,285 minutes to come into first season, Coach Abdesalam Wadu to actually play, 1,758 minutes, which is a 50% reduction, into the playing minutes. But most importantly, his role changed, rather than constantly dropping towards the ball, operating as a free roaming 10, he was increasingly asked or expected to maintain a certain positional discipline, to occupy certain designated zone and wait for the ball to arrive to him within a structure, not him looking for the ball. And there was a a complete shift, for a player whose rhythm and confidence, appear strongly connected to his high ball involvement. That represented for me a major behavior adjustment. And you could see a change in his body language, in his first season, Wadu. Under Rivero, Tito often looked like a player that was enjoying his football. But under our coach, Wadu, there were moments where he looked a little bit frustrated by the tactical constraints, placed upon him. At some point he was substituted, before halftime against Sundowns. And again, there was also another obvious flashpoint, but again, there is important contradictions, that for me make the situation particularly interesting. Tito already demonstrated Bafana that he can operate within a more structured or a more disciplined tactical framework. His international performance at Bafana showed a player capable of following a positional instruction, maintaining a certain structure, sacrifices some of his natural freedom for the collective. But that suggests for me the issue was not necessarily, for me, Tito's issue was not necessarily a capacity issue, which he can't do it. It was more of a preference, and a certain tactical acceptance that for me, he wanted to run opponents. And that is where, for me, the relationship ultimately became difficult, for Tito in this particular instance. The coach was very unlikely to abandon his football model to accommodate just one player. You could see that the player was understandably reluctant, a complete change in behaviors. And for me, especially because that behavior made him successful and influential at Orlando Pirates. And for me, it sort of caused a tactical stallment, and for me, I'm saying this from a recruitment perspective. I don't view Tito's departure as a disaster for Orlando Pirates. I view it as a strategic reset, for Orlando Pirates. Orlando Pirates have a large squad, guys, 41 players. It possesses multiple players capable of assuming greater attacking responsibility. Losing an established star, obviously creates that void. But again, I've always been saying this, it creates another opportunity for a succession plan. Football clubs, guys, cannot become emotionally attached to an individual player to a point where the collective model becomes secondary, in my own view. So for me, the loss of a star at Orlando Pirates is always an opportunity for another to rise. If you look at Relem Foking, he wouldn't have blossomed had Uthembi Nkosi stayed forever at Orlando Pirates. And I've always said, to remind people all the time, I was even telling Intwana Yami, in Hili, was said about Tito leaving Orlando Pirates, that you must be loyal to the badge and not be loyal to the player. So ultimately, for me, how I see this Tito Maswanganyi situation is Tito needed an environment where his strength was going to be maximized. And at Pirates, Coach Wadu needed a collective game model. So neither side for me were necessarily wrong, but sometimes a transfer, is not about the player being good enough or a coach not appreciating his ability, but it's just about a tactical compatibility between the two teams. So for me, Tito was a big player at Orlando Pirates. His numbers, his influence, his connection to the supporters prove, that he is one. But if a player preferred, if the players preferred behaviors and the coach tactical demands, sort of diverge, keeping the relationship, together strongly, it becomes very counterproductive for me. So for me, this offer for Tito, him being allowed to leave, offers him a new environment where he's going to restart, reset, rebuild his momentum, and again, and eventually become a focal point, of another attacking structure, and come back at Bafana, and claim his pace. And for me, his departure, at Orlando Pirates, yes, it creates, some sort of a positional space and an opportunity for another player to emerge, So for me, I'm not worried about Tito leaving. And not because I'm saying he's a bad player, but I think this move is good for both parties, Sometimes the best transfer, is the one that allows a player to become himself again, and the team itself also become a team again, itself again, and I think for me, this move, Tito, is good for Orlando Pirates, is good as well for Tito. And I'm not crying for him. The boy has served us so well. And I wish him nothing but at best. Mapakania, I don't know what you think, Mafetsu. This is my view of the situation. Tanko, Mapakania.